My name is Caitlyn Wilson, and I'm 38 years old. I'm a physician at Houston Methodist Hospital, and I've worked tirelessly to build my career and my life. I bought a beautiful Victorian house in the Heights neighborhood before I even met my husband, Tom, using my savings from my residency years. It was a dream come true, a symbol of my hard work and dedication to my future. Little did I know that dream would soon be overshadowed by a nightmare I never saw coming. Tom and I met when I was deep into my residency, and he was everything I thought I wanted. He was charming, ambitious, and seemed to love me for who I was. But over the years, things started changing. Slowly, he began making subtle comments about my long hours at the hospital and the way my career seemed to take precedence over everything else. He never said it outright, but I could feel the resentment building in him. And now, standing in the kitchen of our home, watching him push transfer papers across the counter, I could feel that resentment had boiled over into something darker. "It's just for tax purposes," Tom continued, his voice softer now as he noticed my hesitation. "You're always talking about being smart with our finances. This is the best move for our family." His words sounded reasonable enough, but something about his tone, the way he reached out and took my hand, didn't sit right with me. His touch felt different, distant, almost as if he was trying to keep a barrier between us. His fingers didn't wrap around mine like they used to, and there was a slight tremor in his voice that I hadn't heard before. It wasn't the same warmth that had once made me feel secure. I stared at the house transfer documents on the granite countertop. My heart raced in my chest, the blood pounding in my ears. The documents were official, their letterheads stark and professional against the white paper. They mocked me. I had built this house. It wasn't just a place to live. It was my investment, my security. I had bought it before we were even married. The house where my children, Emma and Ethan, took their first steps, where they laughed and played and grew. This was my legacy, and now Tom wanted me to sign it away. "Tom, I don't know," I said, my voice trembling as I pulled my hand away from his. "This house, it's my security. I bought it before we were married." His face shifted in that moment, and I saw something flash across it. Anger, frustration. But it was gone just as quickly, replaced by a practiced look of concern. "If you really cared about our marriage," he said, pushing the papers closer to me, "you'd understand why this makes sense. You're always at the hospital, Caitlyn. You're always exhausted. I'm the one who's keeping this family together. I'm the one who handles everything when you're too busy with your work." His words stung, deep, but it was the tone, an edge in it I hadn't heard before that sent a shiver down my spine. I glanced at the baby monitor on the counter, watching Emma and Ethan sleep peacefully upstairs. They were only 2, and they were the reason I worked so hard, pulling double shifts at the hospital. I wanted them to have everything I never had. Tom didn't understand that. His constant complaints about my career and my hours were not about concern. They were about control. "I'm the one who's keeping this family together," he repeated, almost like a mantra. I stood there, frozen. His words felt like a warning, but I couldn't figure out why. Something in the pit of my stomach told me that this wasn't just about finances. Something more was happening, something I hadn't been able to see until now. The next day, as I prepared for my shift at the hospital, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Tom had been distant lately, more so than usual. He'd been spending extra hours at his marketing firm and constantly checking his phone. I brushed it off as work stress, but combined with the sudden push for the house transfer, my medical instincts, honed over years of practice, were screaming that something was wrong. As I rushed around the kitchen trying to get the twins ready for daycare, Tom mentioned almost nonchalantly, "By the way, I dropped your jacket off at the dry cleaners. You can thank me later." His smile seemed forced, and he barely looked up from his phone. I paused for a moment watching him. 6 months ago, he would have been helping me with the twins' bags, making sure I ate a proper breakfast before my shift. But now he was barely present. The change was subtle, but it was there, like a crack in the facade. Something was off, and I wasn't going to ignore it anymore. During a brief break between patients, I called my friend Na, who worked in real estate law. "Something feels off," I told her, ducking into an empty exam room. "Tom's pushing for this house transfer, claiming it's for tax purposes. But I'm not buying it." Na's voice was serious. "Transferring the house to his name alone wouldn't give you any tax benefits, Caitlyn. If anything, it would complicate things, especially since you bought it before you were married. Listen to me carefully. Men don't usually push for property transfers unless they're planning something. Her words made my blood run cold. That afternoon, between patients, I did something I had never done before. I checked our phone records. My hands shook as I scrolled through the recent calls. There it was, a frequent number, one that I didn't recognize. After a quick reverse lookup, I found the name, Destiny Martinez. A social media search revealed a beautiful woman in her mid-20s with check-ins at restaurants where Tom had been spending late nights at work. I scrolled through her photos and my stomach churned. There was one posted 2 weeks ago from a real estate office. The caption read, "Big changes coming, new chapter, blessed." I closed my phone with trembling hands. I knew. I knew exactly what Tom was doing. And now I had proof. I left work early that day, not to pick up the twins, but to head straight to a discreet electronics store Na had recommended. The elderly man behind the counter barely blinked when I explained what I needed. "Protect yourself," he said quietly, as he showed me how to use the small, high-quality recording device. The best evidence is in their own words. When I got home, I set up the device in the kitchen and went about making dinner like it was any other night. When Tom walked in, I pretended to be as casual as he was. "No emergencies at the hospital today?" he asked, his tone light but his eyes sharp. "I thought we could talk more about the house transfer," I said, stirring the pasta sauce. "I've been thinking about what you said." I watched his face light up, a poorly concealed look of triumph crossing his features. "I knew you'd come around," he said, coming up behind me. "You're making the right choice, Kate. This is what's best for our family." I let him talk. The recording device caught every word. His elaborate plans, his carefully constructed lies. The fact that he had been planning this for months. He thought I was clueless. But now I had everything I needed. That night, after putting the twins to bed, I sat in their dimly lit nursery, watching them sleep. I felt a surge of protective rage. Whatever Tom was playing at, he hadn't counted on a mother's instinct to protect her cubs. The next few days were a blur. I made copies of every financial document, secured new credit cards in my name, and started transferring my portion of our savings to a separate account. I wasn't going to wait for him to make his next move. This time, I was ahead. Then a week later, Tom brought home the final transfer papers, already signed by him. "Just your signature," he said, sliding the papers across the counter. "Then we can put this all behind us." I picked up the pen. My hand was steady, but my mind was racing. I looked at him. "I think we need to talk about Destiny first." Tom's face drained of color. His composure faltered. His practiced calm was gone. "What are you talking about?" he sputtered, but his face had already given him away. I pulled out my phone and showed him the screenshots I had collected, the frequent calls, the pictures from social media. "Destiny Martinez," I said, my voice ice cold. "You've been seeing her, haven't you?" His eyes darted to the stairs where the twins were sleeping, and for a moment I saw guilt flash across his face. But it wasn't guilt for betraying me or his family. It was guilt for getting caught. I played the recording from earlier that week, his voice filling the room as he assured Destiny that everything was going according to plan, that they'd be together soon. Tom sat down heavily on one of the kitchen stools, his face pale. "You've been spying on me." "Protecting myself," I corrected, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Just like you've been protecting our tax situation with this house transfer." Tom didn't have any more excuses. The game was over. Tom's expression shifted from shock to anger. His face flushed red with frustration. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. His eyes darted around the kitchen, his mind clearly racing, trying to find a way to twist the situation to his advantage. But it was too late. The truth was already out. "You don't understand," he finally said, his voice low and almost pleading. "Things between us haven't been right for a long time. You're always at the hospital, working. The twins barely even know you. I'm the one who's been holding everything together, and Destiny, she understands me." "Understand you?" I echoed, my voice dangerously calm. "She understands that you're trying to steal my house to move in with her." Tom's face crumpled, and for the first time I saw him truly break. But his breakdown wasn't out of guilt for betraying me. It was guilt for getting caught, for having his entire plan exposed. "The house I bought before I met you," I continued, my eyes hardening. "The house where our children took their first steps. That's what you're trying to steal." Tom stood up suddenly, his hands shaking. You think you're so clever, don't you? He spat, his words biting. You always think you're one step ahead. But you have no idea what it's like to live in your shadow, Caitlyn. Being the guy who married up, Destiny, she appreciates me. She understands me. She doesn't think I'm just some failed husband who can't keep a family together. I took a deep breath, holding my ground. She understands that you're trying to steal my house and use it to build a new life with her. But this house isn't for you to take. It was never yours, and it never will be. He reached for his phone, but I wasn't done. I had more than just the recordings and the screenshots. I had a stack of evidence that would bring his entire plan to its knees. I pulled out the documents I had carefully gathered, bank statements, phone records, emails, and laid them across the table in front of him. Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out? I asked, my voice steady. That I'd just sign away my children's home because you flashed some tax benefits in front of me? You've been meeting with your lawyer behind my back, Tom. Nah warned me about him. He's got a reputation for helping husbands hide assets during divorces. Tom's face went pale. His eyes widened as the reality of what he had done hit him all at once. He looked at the papers in front of him, then back at me, his mind scrambling, trying to salvage his crumbling empire. You talked to Na? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. I talked to a lot of people, I replied, feeling the power shift in the room. I'm not as clueless as you think I am. There was no more pretense, no more games. Tom had been caught, and now there was nothing left for him to do but try to find a way out. But there was no escape from the mess he had made. The lies, the betrayal, the manipulation, it had all come crashing down. As the evening wore on, the tension in the house grew unbearable. I could feel the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on me. The twins were upstairs, blissfully unaware of the war unfolding just below them. But for me, this was a fight I couldn't back down from. I had to protect them, even if it meant facing Tom, even if it meant exposing everything. The next few days were a blur of legal meetings, phone calls, and strategic moves. Tom tried to fight back, claiming that I was unreasonable, that I was overreacting. But every time he tried to spin his story, I was ready with the truth. I had everything, recordings, bank statements, emails, and it was clear to everyone who looked at the evidence who was in the wrong. Tom's lawyer began to back down, realizing that the case was not in his favor. And finally, after weeks of back and forth, Tom was forced to sign away any claim to the house in exchange for more favorable custody arrangements. His world, once so carefully constructed, had come crashing down. His affair with Destiny, his embezzling from his firm, his entire life of deception, it had all been exposed. I could finally breathe. But as I sat in the courtroom, listening to the judge finalize everything, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of relief and sorrow. Tom had made his choices, and now he had to face the consequences. I had won, but the victory wasn't sweet. It wasn't about the house or the money. It was about protecting my children, about finding my own strength, and about reclaiming what was rightfully mine. Later, I found myself thinking about Destiny. She had been another victim of Tom's lies. She had been caught up in his web, thinking she was going to get everything he promised her. But now she was just another casualty of his betrayal. From what I'd heard, she'd moved on to someone else, but I couldn't help but wonder if she'd ever realize how close she'd come to being trapped in Tom's game. The weeks that followed were a blur of healing and rebuilding. My career flourished. I became the chief of emergency medicine at the hospital, something I had always dreamed of but never thought possible while raising twins on my own. The twins adjusted better than I had feared. They didn't miss the drama. They didn't even know what had happened. They were too young, too innocent to understand the complexities of adult life. They just loved me, and I loved them. And that was all that mattered. Tom, on the other hand, continued to spiral. His legal troubles mounted. His embezzling charges caught up with him. Destiny, the woman he thought would be his salvation, dumped him once she found out about his criminal charges. He was left alone, jobless, and facing a future that was far from the life he had promised her. As for me, I kept moving forward. I focused on my children, my career, and rebuilding the life that had been torn apart. Tom's departure was just the beginning. There was so much more ahead. And in the quiet moments, as I watched my children grow and thrive, I knew that this was the life I had worked for. This was the life I deserved. And nothing, no one, could ever take that away from me. Trust your instincts. No one knows you better than yourself, and when something feels off, don't ignore it. If I had ignored my gut, I might have signed away everything that mattered to me. It's not just about surviving betrayal. It's about learning to trust yourself, reclaiming your power, and fighting for what you deserve. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to face betrayal and fight back? What did you do to protect yourself and your future? Share your stories in the comments. We all have a lesson to learn from each other. Let's continue the conversation and empower each other to stand up for what we deserve.